everyone, Vyavsan this side. So today hand we are dealing with a topic called as human circulatory system. It's also called as the blood vascular system. Okay, or rather I'll be going for the structure of heart. So let's get started. Here, the blood vascular system consists of a muscular chambered heart, a network of closed branching blood vessels, and blood, the fluid which is circulated. So first thing first, if I'll be dealing with, I'll be starting with a word called as heart. So here, among all the three germ layers, that is the ectoderm, mesoderm, and the endoderm, heart is the mesodermally origin. Okay, heart is a mesodermally derived organ which is situated in the thoracic cavity, which means in the chest region, which is situated in the thoracic cavity in between the two lungs. Okay, in between the two lungs. Here, it is slightly tilted to the left. Please do remember one thing, that the heart is not properly present in the left thoracic cavity, rather it is slightly tilted to the left portion, and it has the size of a clenched fist. Okay, which means a closed fist. Okay, it has the size of the closed fist in which the thumb is within the fingers. It is protected by a double walled membranous bag that is called as pericardium. Okay, please do remember that the heart is protected by a double walled membranous bag which is called as pericardium, which is having a special type of the fluid which is called as pericardial fluid, which is functioning as a shock absorber or the mechanical shock absorber for the heart. Do remember one thing, that our heart is four chambered and two are relatively smaller, which are present in the upper location called as atria, singular is atrium, whereas the two are larger called as the ventricles. Okay, this is just like the general knowledge kind of information which you already know. Now, a thin muscular wall called as interatrial septum. A thin muscular wall which is called as interatrial septum, which separates the right and the left atria. Which separates the right and the left atria, whereas a thick walled interventricular septum is also present, which is separating the left and the right ventricles. Okay, the atrium and the ventricle of the same side are also separated by a thick fibrous tissue called as atrioventricular septum. Now, if I'll be drawing the heart somehow, something like this, here, somehow like this. Okay, so go through. So if I'm drawing something like this, if I'm drawing something like this, right atrium, this will be right ventricle, this will be left atrium, this will be left ventricle. Correct? Okay. So here the septum which is separating the right and the left atria, here the right and the left atria is called as interatrial septum. So I'll be drawing here. This is the interatrial septum. Correct? Okay, and the septum which is dividing, separating the interventricular septum, so here it will be in the lower portion. Correct? Whereas the septum which is separating the atrioventricular septum, the atrium and the ventricles, so here this will be. Correct? Okay, so if I'm dealing with the first one called as the atrial septum, the second one is called the ventricular septum, the third one is called as atrioventricular septum. However, each of these septa are provided with their openings through which the two chambers of the same side are connected. Deal with. And the openings have their own names. The opening between the right atrium and the right ventricle, the opening between the right atrium and the right ventricle is guarded by a wall formed by three muscular flaps or cusp. We will be calling them as cuspid walls. And do remember one thing, that in case of the right atrium and the right ventricle, here right atrium and the right ventricle, the tricuspid wall is present, whereas the bicuspid wall or the mitral wall, is present in between the left atrium and the left ventricle. So please do remember one thing, there is a trick which I used to follow when I was preparing for the competitive, that right try. So ultimately in between the right atrium and the right ventricle, tricuspid wall is present, whereas in the left atrium and the left ventricle, bicuspid or the mitral wall is present. Okay, the tricuspid wall is having something like structure like this, a V and a W, whereas a bicuspid valve is having the structure of a normal W. Okay, so you can go through. Now, the opening of the right and the left ventricle into the pulmonary artery and the aorta, which means the right ventricle opens into the pulmonary artery, whereas the left ventricle opens into the aorta. Correct? Deal with. So this is respectively are provided with a new wall called a semilunar walls. The semilunar walls. So basically, whenever I will be going through, the atrioventricular walls are called as cuspid walls. Correct? The atrioventricular walls are called as cuspid walls, whereas the ventricular walls are called as semilunar walls. Done? Deal with. Now, the walls in the heart, the walls in the heart allows the flow of the blood only in one direction. That is from the atria to the ventricles. From the atria to the ventricles. Because they are not allowing the back flow of the blood. Okay, and from the ventricles to the pulmonary artery or aorta, whatever it may be. These walls are preventing any backward flow, or that is what we call as the back flow of the blood. Now, about something about the heart. The entire heart is made up of cardiac muscle, correct? The walls of the ventricles are much thicker than that of atria because the atria are the receiving chambers, whereas the ventricles are the pumping chamber. And if you want ventricles to be to pump the blood either to the lungs or towards the body organs, they have to be stronger as compared to the atria. And that is the reason why the walls of the ventricles are much thicker than that of the atria. And specialized cardiac musculature is called as the nodal tissue. The nodal tissue, which is also distributed in the heart, we'll be checking this in the figure. Now, a patch of the tissue is present in the right upper corner. Do remember, right upper corner of the right atrium, called as sinoatrial node, or in short we can call it as SAN. Whereas the another mass of the tissue is seen in the lower left corner of the right atrium, called as atrioventricular node or AV node. Okay, deal with. Now if I'm drawing the right ventricle first, like the complete heart I'm drawing, and here we have the right ventricle, correct? Right ventricle. So where is the SA node is present? It is present in the upper right upper corner. So somehow here like the SA node will be present, correct? Okay, so I'll be dealing here like the SA node is present, and the atrioventricular or the AV node is present in the lower left corner. AV node is present in the lower left corner, so it will be present here. So deal with the case. Okay, now if I'll be dealing here that the bundle of the nodal fibers, the bundle of the nodal fibers, atrioventricular bundle, continues to form the AVN, which passes through the atrioventricular septa to emerge on the top of the interventricular septum and immediately divides into right and the left bundle. Correct? Immediately divides into right and the left bundle. Now, these branches give rise to a minute fiber throughout the ventricular musculature of the respective side, called as Purkinje fiber. Called as Purkinje fiber. Do remember one thing, that the Purkinje fibers are specifically present in the ventricles, which means somehow like if I'll be drawing SA to AV to Purkinje. Okay? SA to AV to Purkinje. You can go through. Okay? Now here, the nodal musculature has the ability to generate the action potential without any external stimulus. Without any external stimulus. Please do remember one thing, that the nodal tissues here, the nodal tissues have the ability to generate the action potential without any external stimulus, which means it is auto excitable. Okay, deal with. Whereas the number of the action potential could be generated in a minute vary at different part of the nodal system. So ultimately SA, AV or the bundle of His. So SA node can generate the maximum number of the action potential, that is 70 to 75 minute, action potentials per minute. And ultimately, if the 70 to 75 action potentials are getting generated per minute by the SA node, so the normal heartbeat will be ranging from the 70 to 75 beats per minute. Correct? Or on an average, there are 72 beats per minute. Okay? There are 72 beats per minute. Deal with. Now, the structure of the heart. So here the structure of the heart is in front of us. We can check this out here. Now the structure of the heart. So now we are dealing with the structure of the heart. We can go through the cases that the aorta is here, correct? And aorta is basically connected with the left ventricle. So where's the left ventricle? This is the left ventricle. So somehow the blood is going through in this direction. Okay. Now, where is the pulmonary artery? So here we have pulmonary artery, and the pulmonary artery is getting opened from the left atrium. So somehow like blood is coming in this fashion. Okay, blood is coming in this fashion. Okay, deal with the cane. And if the pulmonary veins are there, and the pulmonary veins are basically related with the right ventricle. Okay, so blood is something like in this fashion. Okay, go through, and the portion of the heart which is receiving the blood all from all over the organs of the body is called as the right atrium. Okay, so this is the right atrium. So deal with the case again. This one is the right atrium, this one is the left atrium, this one is the left ventricle, and this is the right ventricle. Deal with the cases. Okay, and in case of the right ventricle we have the SA node as well, we have the AV node as well, and these are the bundle of his, correct? Okay, now what does this chordae tendineae means? So these are just like that, they are resembling the tendons, and they are just attached with the papillae of the heart muscle along with the walls. This is tri and this is bi. So in case of the right, tri, and in case of the left, bicuspid walls are present. Okay, so go through the cases as well. Done, and we are dealing with a topic called as cardiac cycle. So let's get started here. So how does the heart functions? So here, to begin with all, the four chambers of the heart rate in a relaxed state, and they are in the joint diastole. So as the tricuspid and the bicuspid walls are open, the blood from the pulmonary veins and the vena cava, which means the superior vena cava as well and the inferior vena cava as well, or rather I'll be calling as coronary sinus, flows into the left and the right ventricle. In the left ventricle, the blood is coming through the pulmonary vein, whereas in the right, it is coming from the superior and the inferior vena cava, or rather I'll be calling it as coronary sinus. So deal with the case. Okay. Now the semilunar walls, are closed at this stage. Please do remember one thing. Whenever the blood is getting entered in the atria, at that time the semilunar walls are closed. The semilunar walls are closed. Okay. And the SA nodes will now generate the action potential, which stimulates both the atria to undergo simultaneous contraction. That is what we call as atrial systole. Okay, that is what we call as atrial systole, and this will be increasing the flow of blood into the ventricle by 30%. Okay, so the atrial systole is increasing the flow of the blood into the ventricles by 30%, and the blood will be passed from the cuspid walls, either the tricuspid or the bicuspid walls. Now the action potential is conducted to the ventricular side by the AV node and the AV bundle, the AV node and the AV bundle from the bundle of His. Okay, from the bundle of His. We have just gone through the bundle of His in the diagram of the heart. Now, and the bundle of His will be transmitting it through entire ventricular musculature up to the Purkinje fiber. So basically the bundle of His is the connection between the AV node and the Purkinje fiber. Okay, deal with. And this causes the ventricular muscles to contract. Okay, deal with the case. And what does this mean? That means the ventricular systole. Please do remember one thing, that the systole means contraction, whereas diastole means relaxation. Now, dealing with the atria now. The atria undergoes relaxation, which means the diastole coinciding with the ventricular systole. So whenever the ventricular systole is taking place, at the same time the atria are undergoing diastole. Okay, so they are going through the alternate fashion. The ventricular systole increases the ventricular pressure, causing the closure of the tricuspid and the bicuspid walls due to attempted backflow, which means they can be opened from in one direction only. So ultimately, like the whenever the backflow of the blood will take place, that will be closing the tricuspid and the bicuspid walls. As the ventricular pressure increases further, the semilunar walls guarding the pulmonary artery in the right ventricle, whereas the aorta in the left ventricle will be going through, and they are forced open. They are forced open, allowing the blood in the ventricles to flow through these vessels. They are forced open, allowing the blood to flow through these vessels into the circulatory pathway. Now, what will happen hence? The ventricles will now relax because the blood has been gone from the ventricles now, either in the right or in the left. So this relaxation of the ventricle will be called as ventricular diastole. And the ventricular pressure falls, causing the closure of the semilunar walls. Yes, which prevents the backflow of the blood into the ventricles. And as the ventricles pressure declines further, the tricuspid and the bicuspid walls are pushed open by the pressure in the atria, which is exerted by the blood which was being emptied into them by the veins. Here, so what will happen hence? So I'll be just again drawing the brief diagram, like the box diagram of my heart. Here, this one is the right atrium, this one is the right ventricle, this is the left atrium and the left ventricle. So here we had the tricuspid wall, correct, and here we had the bicuspid wall. So whenever the blood has entered here, like the SA node has made an action potential, so ultimately 30% of the blood flow has been increased here, and the blood will be entering into the right ventricle here, and the left ventricle here. Now what will happen? Whenever this blood will try to go against the concentration gradient, so this tricuspid wall will close, and this bicuspid wall will also close, preventing the backflow of the blood. Now, whenever these ventricles are getting in the systole configuration, the blood will come out through the semilunar walls. And whenever this blood will try to go back, the semilunar wall or the half moon shaped walls will close again. And they will be now preventing the backflow of the blood. So now, the blood now once again moves freely in the ventricle towards the ventricle. And now both the ventricles and the atria, both of them are in the relaxed phase. So as earlier shown, like the SA node generates a new action potential, and the events described above are repeated in the sequence, and the process continues. And the sequential event in the heat, like heart, which is like cyclically repeated, is called as the cardiac cycle. Consists of the diastole and the systole both. Okay. Now, the heart is beating 72 times per minute, correct? So the cardiac cycles are performed per minute. From this, it could be deduced that the duration of the cardiac cycle is 0.8 second, correct? The duration of the cardiac cycle is 0.8 second. Now, during a cardiac cycle, each ventricle pumps out approximately 70 ml of the blood, which is called as a stroke volume. And the stroke volume is multiplied by the heart rate per minute, which means if I'll be going through like 70 into 72 is equal to almost is equal to somehow, like I'll be going through in this fashion, this will be 5 liters, correct? Okay, so the cardiac output here will be almost 5000 milliliter or 5 liter in a healthy individual. Okay, deal with what is the cardiac output. Basically the ability to alter the stroke volume as the heart rate and thereby the cardiac output. So here the cardiac output of an athlete will be much higher than of a ordinary person. Yes, this is for sure, because whenever the heart is working more and more and more, like ultimately the heart will become stronger. And whenever like the athlete like will be having the, or rather I'll be going through the word called as bradycardia. Hopefully you do know this bradycardia. So this bradycardia, the athlete's cardiac output will be much larger than that of an ordinary person which has not undergone through like the strenuous exercise. Okay, go through. So the output differs from person to person. Now, during each cardiac cycle, two prominent sounds are produced which are called as lub and dub. The first heart sound lub is associated with the closure of the tricuspid and the bicuspid walls, whereas the second sound called as dub is associated with the closure of the semilunar walls. Okay, deal with. Now, if I'll be dealing with that, the lub is produced by the closure of the tricuspid and the bicuspid walls, whereas dub is produced by the closure of the semilunar walls. So go through the cases as well. Okay, this was all about the circulatory system, or rather I'll be calling it as this was all about the structure of the heart and the cardiac cycle, and we'll be going through the remaining topics in the next lecture. Hopefully this lecture series is beneficial for you guys. If you do have any kind of questions, you can ask me there in the comment section as well. Thank you very much for your so much support. Thank you.